He said he'd love me forever. I still remember the way his voice trembled when he said it. Soft, tender, like he meant every syllable. And for a woman like me, who had spent decades in quiet loneliness, those words felt like rain after a long, endless drought. My name is Margaret, though most people just call me Maggie now. I'm 72, and I never thought love would find me again, not after losing my husband and burying 30 years of marriage with him. But then came Richard. I met him at the farmer's market one windy Sunday morning. I was buying fresh daisies for my husband's grave, and he was standing right beside me, holding a loaf of bread and humming some old Sinatra tune. He looked charming in that old-fashioned way, pressed shirt, gentle eyes, and silver hair brushed neatly to the side. When he noticed I was struggling with my bag, he offered to help. "A beautiful lady like you shouldn't carry so much alone," he said, smiling. I laughed awkwardly, brushing off the compliment, but something in his voice stayed with me. We started talking about the weather, about the sweetness of ripe strawberries, about how the city had changed so much since we were young. He told me he was a retired architect who had moved to town after his wife passed. "Losing her nearly killed me," he said softly, "but I promised I'd keep living. She'd never forgive me otherwise." I understood that pain all too well. In that moment, we weren't strangers. We were two broken souls standing under the same sky, pretending not to be lonely. Over the weeks that followed, he became a part of my routine. He'd show up at the market every Sunday, always with that same warm smile and a fresh bouquet of tulips. "Tulips for the lady who makes my week brighter," he'd say. I'd blush like a schoolgirl, which was ridiculous for someone my age, but I couldn't help it. There was a charm about him that disarmed me. He spoke with kindness, but there was mystery behind his eyes, a heaviness, as though he carried stories he'd never told. One afternoon he offered to walk me home. "Just to make sure you get there safe," he insisted, and I let him. My small house felt warmer when he stepped inside. We sat at my kitchen table drinking tea, and he listened, really listened, as I told him about my late husband, the years we spent building this little home, and how quiet the nights had become since he passed. Richard reached across the table and gently held my hand. "You've kept love alive all these years, Maggie. That's rare." I didn't know then that those words would later haunt me. We started seeing each other almost every day. He'd come over with groceries, repair the squeaky door, or just sit by the fireplace reading old novels aloud. He had a voice that could soothe a storm. My friends from church teased me. "Margaret's got herself a new beau," they'd laugh, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt alive again. He made me believe that maybe love didn't end at 70. He always paid for dinners, always refused my help. "Let me take care of you, sweetheart," he'd say, and my heart would melt. There was something so old-fashioned, so safe about him. When he spoke about the future, about travelling together, about sunsets in Italy, I almost believed we could have those things. He'd trace my hand with his finger and whisper, "We're meant to find each other, Maggie. Fate doesn't make mistakes twice." But looking back now, I see the small cracks. The way he avoided questions about his past, how his eyes would dart away when I asked where his family lived, or why he never spoke about his children. The way his phone would ring late at night, and he'd silence it quickly, muttering, "Wrong number." At the time, I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, love requires trust. I'd waited too long for companionship to ruin it with suspicion. One evening, he brought over a bottle of red wine and said, "To new beginnings." We clinked glasses, and for the first time, he kissed me. It was gentle, almost reverent. He smelled like cedarwood and something faintly metallic. I can still smell it if I close my eyes. From that night onward, we were inseparable. He started leaving things at my house, a jacket, a shaving kit, a book he was reading. I didn't realize he was slowly planting himself into my world, rooting deep enough that I wouldn't notice the storm he was preparing. Months passed, and he began to talk about finances. Casually at first. "I could help you manage your savings better," he'd say. "You're too kind to those greedy banks." I laughed it off, but he persisted. "I've invested before, Maggie. I know how to make money work for us." The way he said us made my heart flutter. He made it sound so innocent, so loving, as if planning our shared future. I remember the night he showed me his laptop. Graphs, statements, investments. I didn't understand half of it, but he explained it with patience. If we pool our savings, we could retire comfortably, maybe even buy that little house near the sea you always talk about. I hesitated, but he squeezed my hand gently. "You trust me, don't you?" And of course I did. That night, after he'd left, I sat by the window and looked at the stars. I remember whispering to myself, maybe this is what second chances look like. Maybe the universe had decided to give me one last taste of love before it was too late. If only I knew that same universe was about to teach me its cruelest lesson. Because the morning I woke up to find his side of the bed cold and his jacket gone, I still thought he'd just stepped out early. When I saw his shaving kit missing, I told myself he must have packed it for a trip. When I checked my phone and saw no messages, I thought maybe he'd lost signal. It wasn't until I went to make coffee and saw the note on the counter that the truth began to crawl into my bones. It wasn't even a proper note, just 2 words written in his neat handwriting. "I'm sorry." My knees buckled beneath me as I clutched that slip of paper. The teapot hissed behind me, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew. The story I had built so carefully, the love I had dared to believe in again, had shattered overnight. And it wasn't just my heart he'd taken with him. It was everything. For hours, I sat at the kitchen table staring at that note. "I'm sorry." 2 little words that hollowed out my world. I must have read them 100 times, tracing each letter like maybe I could find a clue, a reason, an explanation hiding between the ink strokes. The morning sun poured through the window, lighting up the empty chair across from me. His chair. And I swear for a second I could still see the ghost of him sitting there, smiling, sipping tea. But it was only dust dancing in the light. I tried calling his phone, straight to voicemail. I called again, and again. Nothing. His voice greeting me, "Hey, it's Richard, leave me a message," felt like mockery now. My voice cracked as I whispered into the phone. "Richard, please call me back. I don't understand." But deep down, something inside me already knew I would never hear that voice again. When I looked around the house, I started noticing the little things that were gone. His jacket, his books, his shaving kit, the old watch he used to leave on the dresser. It was as if he'd erased himself, leaving no trace except that cruel apology. I opened the drawer where I kept my financial papers, trembling as I pulled out my bank folder. My breath caught when I saw the balance. My heart stopped. The numbers didn't make sense. My savings, the money I'd worked decades for, the security I had left after my husband passed, was gone. Completely gone. Transferred out just 2 days ago. I checked again, thinking maybe it was a glitch. Then I saw it. A joint account I'd opened months ago with Richard's name attached, the one he'd insisted would make things easier for us. My vision blurred. The realization hit like a physical blow. He hadn't disappeared from love. He disappeared with everything I owned. The first scream that left my throat didn't even sound human. It was raw, guttural, born from disbelief and humiliation. I tore through the house, searching for something, anything, some hint of where he'd gone, some explanation that would make it all make sense. But there was nothing. Not a receipt, not a scrap of his handwriting except that one note. The man I thought I knew didn't exist. The next few days were a blur. I barely ate. I barely slept. My neighbours knocked, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I sat by the window every evening, watching the street, hoping maybe he'd walk back through the gate and tell me it was all a mistake, that there'd been some misunderstanding. But he didn't. The nights were long and cruel, filled with the echo of his laughter and the whisper of his lies. When I finally gathered the strength to go to the police, I felt like a fool. The young officer behind the desk barely hid his pity when I handed him the bank statements and that pitiful note. "Ma'am," he said gently, "these kinds of scams, they happen more than you'd think. Con artists target widows, retirees, people who trust easily." His words stung like acid. People who trust easily. I'd always thought of myself as careful, wise. But love, or what I thought was love, had made me blind. They opened a file, took my statement, and promised to look into it. But weeks passed with no news. The bank couldn't reverse the transfers. The trail was cold. I was left with nothing but my memories, and the sickening realization that every tender moment, every word, every promise had been calculated. I started replaying everything in my head, obsessing over details I'd missed. The way he always redirected conversations about his past. How he once flinched when I mentioned my late husband's pension. How he'd insisted I change my will, just to make sure things go smoothly. And yet I'd ignored it all because I wanted to believe in something beautiful again. That's what made the betrayal worse. Not the money, not even the lies, but the fact that I had willingly handed him the knife he used to wound me. One evening, I sat alone by the fireplace, staring at the empty chair again. The silence felt heavier than ever. I reached for the small box that still held my late husband's wedding ring, the only thing Richard hadn't touched. I slipped it onto my finger, and tears blurred my vision. "I'm sorry, John," I whispered. "I let someone make a fool of me." But as the tears dried, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let Richard fade into the night without a trace. He had stolen my peace, my savings, my dignity, but he wouldn't steal my will to fight. I began digging. I went through every old text, every picture, every scrap of conversation I could find. I searched his name online. Richard Alden. But there were no records, no trace of a retired architect. Nothing. That's when it dawned on me. Even his name had probably been a lie. Then, one night, while scrolling through a local community page, something caught my eye. A post from a woman in another town, warning others about a man who had scammed her elderly mother. The photo she attached nearly stopped my heart. There he was, the same smile, the same silver hair. Only his name in her story was James Whitmore. My hands shook as I read the details. The flowers, the market meetings, the promises of marriage. It was my story, written by someone else. He'd done this before, maybe dozens of times. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. My whole body trembled as I stared at his picture, realizing the man who'd whispered, "I love you," in my ear had probably whispered those same words to countless women before me, each one believing she was special, each one left broken. That night I printed the photo and pinned it on the wall, not as a memory, but as a target. I didn't know how I'd do it, but I made myself a promise. I'd find him. Not for the money, though I'd lost everything, but for every woman he'd tricked into believing love could still be pure, for every tear shed over his lies. The next morning, I put on my coat, tied my scarf tight, and stepped outside. The air was cold, sharp, almost punishing, but for the first time in weeks, I felt alive again. The old Maggie who'd waited quietly for love was gone. What remained was something fiercer. Somewhere out there, Richard, or James, or whatever his name really was living off the pain of others. But he didn't know me anymore. He didn't know what I had become. I whispered his name to the wind, almost like a vow. You stole from the wrong woman. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of his reckoning. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was a storm, images of him flashing through my head like cruel ghosts. His laughter, his promises, his touch. Each memory twisted now, poisoned. I kept staring at that printed photo, the one I'd pinned on my wall. The man I loved, or thought I loved, staring back at me with that charming, deceitful smile. By morning, I had a plan. A messy, desperate plan, but it was something. I went back online, scouring forums, local news archives, Facebook community pages, anywhere I could find a trace of women who'd been duped by men like him. Hours turned into days, and slowly, patterns began to appear. James Whitmore in one town, Richard Alden in another, Michael Dane somewhere else. Always a retired professional, architect, doctor, engineer. Always widowed, always charming, and always disappearing with everything. One woman's story hit too close. Her name was Clara, 68, from a small coastal town just 2 hours away. She'd posted on a support group for fraud victims. He called himself James, said he'd lost his wife to cancer, said he'd never felt a connection like ours. I lost $78,000 before I realised he'd vanished. I wrote to her immediately. My hands shook as I typed, Clara, I think I know your James. He might have used another name with me, Richard Alden. She replied within an hour. Her message was short but heavy. If you're talking about a tall man with silver hair and blue-grey eyes, then yes, that's him. We need to talk. We met the next afternoon at a small cafe near the train station. When she walked in, I recognised the same hollow look in her eyes that I saw in my mirror every morning. We didn't need introductions. We just hugged, two strangers bound by the same wound. Over coffee, she told me her story. It was like listening to my own life replayed by another voice. The same tenderness, the same flattery, the same promises of a shared future. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the world, she whispered, staring into her cup. Then one morning he was gone, along with my savings, my grandmother's ring, even the keys to my car. We talked for hours, connecting dots, comparing notes, dates, towns, details. He had a pattern. He'd stayed just long enough to earn trust, always moving to new places where nobody knew his past. He preyed on women like us, kind, lonely, hopeful. Clara had already filed a report, but nothing had come of it. The police say men like him use fake IDs, burner phones, even rented cars, she said bitterly. They disappear before you can even spell betrayal. But I wasn't ready to let that be the end. There has to be a way, I said, my voice trembling. He's not a ghost. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. Maybe we find him ourselves. And so began our strange partnership. Two women in their 60s playing detective against a man who'd made deception his art. We started by contacting others from the forums. Slowly, more women came forward. Janet from Wisconsin, Eliza from New York, even a woman named Marie from Florida who'd nearly married him before he vanished. Each story was the same. His charm, his kindness, his lies. We created a small group chat. We called it the Widow's Circle. Every night we shared information, screenshots, photos, bank transfers, details about his aliases. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed. He always used similar email addresses, slight variations of the same initials. The same phrasing in his messages. You deserve peace. I'll take care of you. Those words that once melted me now made my skin crawl. Then, one evening, Clara messaged me frantically. "Maggie, I think he's in touch with someone new." She sent me screenshots from a woman's Facebook profile, a post gushing about a man named Robert Lane, who'd recently moved into her neighborhood. There was a photo attached. My breath hitched. It was him. Same eyes, same smirk, only this time clean-shaven and wearing a different hairstyle. But it was him. I knew those eyes anywhere. "He's nearby," I whispered. The address was listed in her public post, a small suburban area just 40 miles away. I couldn't believe it. After months of sleepless nights and despair, there he was, living comfortably, probably preparing to ruin someone else's life. I told Clara, "We have to warn her." She nodded, but she was cautious. "If we go to the police now, they'll tell us it's circumstantial. We need proof. Solid proof he's the same man." So we decided to go there ourselves. It was raining the day we drove to that neighborhood. The sky was grey and the roads shimmered like glass. My heart pounded the entire way. I wasn't sure what I'd do if I saw him. Scream? Confront him? Collapse? I didn't know. All I knew was that I needed to see him again, to look into his face and demand why. When we arrived, the street was quiet. The houses looked peaceful, oblivious to the predator hiding among them. We parked near a small house with white shutters and waited. Minutes turned into hours, and then, there he was. He stepped out of the house wearing a beige coat, carrying a small grocery bag. My breath caught in my throat. There was no mistake. It was him, the same man who'd kissed my hand and sworn to grow old with me. Only now he looked carefree, even younger. He smiled as he waved to a woman at the door, the new victim, no doubt. I felt something break inside me. A sound escaped my lips, half sob, half growl. "That's him," I whispered. "That's the monster." Clara gripped my arm tightly. "Not yet. We need to be smart." We followed him at a distance, down to the grocery store, then to a cafe. Every move he made was calm, confident, like he didn't carry the ghosts of broken women behind him. At the cafe, he sat by the window, chatting with a young barista. I snapped photos, shaky but clear enough to show his face. Proof. Finally, proof. But as I lowered my phone, something chilling happened. He turned, and for 1 second his eyes met mine through the glass. I froze. His smile faded. Recognition flickered in his expression. And then he smiled again, that same warm, devastating smile he'd used to destroy me. In that moment I knew. He wasn't afraid. He stood up, paid his bill, and walked calmly to his car. He didn't run. He didn't look back. He just drove off, leaving me trembling. Clara whispered, "He knows we're here." That night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I opened the message and my blood ran cold. "You should have left it alone, Maggie." No name, no signature, just that. My hands shook as I read it again and again. He knew my name. He knew where I was. And for the first time since he vanished, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was terrified. I didn't sleep that night. The message kept replaying in my head like a whisper in the dark. "You should have left it alone, Maggie." My name on his tongue again, even if only written, made me sick. How did he know I was there? How did he even get my number? My phone slipped from my hand as a wave of nausea washed over me. Clara called right after. Her voice trembled through the receiver. "Maggie, did you get it too?" she asked. My heart dropped. "He messaged you?" "Yes, same words, word for word." That's when I realized he wasn't just a con artist. He was a predator who enjoyed the fear he left behind. It wasn't enough for him to steal our money. He had to make sure we remembered him every time the phone rang, every time a shadow moved outside our windows. For the first time, I felt truly unsafe in my own home. I locked the doors, double-checked the windows, even pushed a chair under the knob of my bedroom door. I left the lights on all night. Every creak, every rustle of the trees outside made my pulse race. By morning, exhaustion replaced fear with fury. He wanted me scared, but I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction, not again. I went straight to the police station with Clara, phone in hand, screenshots ready. The officer who had filed my case earlier frowned as he read the text. "This is harassment," he said, typing on his computer. "We'll trace the number, see if we can link it to any of his known aliases." But deep down, I didn't believe much would come of it. The system always seemed one step too slow for men like him. Clara and I decided to reach out to a journalist who'd covered scams targeting older women. Her name was Hannah Rhodes, a sharp, determined reporter who listened to our story with a mix of shock and anger. "This guy's a serial predator," she said. "If what you're telling me is true, he's been doing this for years across states. We might be able to expose him publicly." The thought of it both thrilled and terrified me. "Wouldn't that put us in danger?" I asked. Hannah shook her head. "Men like him survive in silence. If we shine a light on him, he'll have nowhere left to hide." And so, for the first time, I decided to tell my story, not just to heal myself, but to warn others. The article went live a week later, titled "The Silver Fox Scammer: How One Man Stole Hearts and Fortunes Across the Country." Hannah had done her research. She'd connected more than 12 women's accounts, each eerily similar. His aliases, his methods, his charm, it was all laid bare. My photo was there too, under my real name. At first, I hesitated, ashamed of how foolish I'd been. But then I realized, my shame wasn't mine to carry anymore. The article spread faster than I imagined. Within days, more women reached out, some from as far as Canada, some from towns I'd never heard of. Each had fallen for his lies. Each had lost something precious. But fame comes with a price. That night, I received another message. "You made a mistake, sweetheart." My hands trembled as I read it. Attached was a photo of my house, my very street, taken just hours ago. I dropped my phone. My body went cold. He was here, somewhere near, watching. I called the police immediately, and within minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived. They searched the area, checked my locks, told me to stay with a friend. But when I packed my things and looked out the window one last time, I swore I saw a silhouette across the street. A tall man in a beige coat, standing just beyond the lamplight. The next morning, I moved in, temporarily with Clara. We didn't speak much that day. The air between us was thick with unspoken fear. But beneath that fear, something stronger burned, a shared determination. "He thinks he can scare us into silence," Clara said, her voice firm. "But he's the one who should be afraid now." We worked closely with Hannah after that. She kept digging, contacting banks, tracing transactions, chasing digital breadcrumbs. And then, one evening, she called with a voice that trembled between excitement and disbelief. "Maggie, we found him." I nearly dropped the phone. "What do you mean?" He slipped up, used one of his old fake names to rent a car near a small marina 2 days ago. He's been living on a boat under a new alias, Robert Lanning. It's docked on the coast. The world went still. "You're sure?" "Positive. I've confirmed with 2 victims who recognized his face." A mix of rage and closure surged through me. He was real again, not some phantom of my nightmares, but a man who could be caught. I wanted to see him with my own eyes one last time, to look him in the face, not as his victim, but as the woman who refused to stay broken. Clara insisted we let the authorities handle it, but when the police hesitated, "We need confirmation before we can act," they said. I couldn't wait anymore. I had to see for myself. That night, under a sky heavy with mist, Clara and I drove to the marina. The smell of salt filled the air, and the sound of water slapped softly against the docks. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest as we approached the boat Hannah had described, a white vessel named Elysium. There was light inside. Through the window I saw him, pouring himself a drink, humming, completely unaware that the ghosts of his past were standing a few feet away. For a moment I couldn't move. Every part of me screamed to turn back, but then he lifted his glass, smirking to himself, and I remembered every tear I had shed. I stepped forward. The wooden dock creaked beneath my feet. The sound made him look up. His eyes met mine through the window, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker in them. He opened the door slowly, cautious. "Maggie?" he said softly, like it was still 6 months ago, and we were about to share tea by the fire. "What are you doing here?" I could barely speak. "You stole everything from me." He smiled faintly, shrugging. "Now, sweetheart, let's not be dramatic. You gave it willingly. I didn't force you." The arrogance in his tone snapped something inside me. "You ruined lives," I shouted. "You preyed on love and trust." He took a slow step forward, lowering his voice. "And yet you're still here, because you need me to make sense of it all." For a second, the world blurred. His words, the ocean, the trembling dock. Then, behind me, I heard sirens. Flashing lights reflected on the water. Hannah had called the police and tracked our location. Officers rushed down the pier shouting commands. Richard, or James, or Robert, whatever name he wore, froze. Then, just as they reached him, he turned, tried to run, but his foot slipped on the wet dock. The splash echoed through the night. For a few seconds there was silence, then frantic shouts, beams of flashlights scanning the water. But the waves swallowed him before anyone could reach. I stood there, staring into the black water, my breath ragged. It was over. Or maybe it never really would be. For hours after they pulled him from the water, I just stood there on the dock, frozen. The sea was dark, swallowing everything, and all I could hear were the echoes of shouted commands, the rustle of police radios, the low hum of voices speaking words I couldn't process. My whole body trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper, a kind of emptiness that hollowed me out from the inside. When they brought him to shore, his face was pale, lifeless, and yet that same faint smirk still lingered at the corner of his lips. The man who'd stolen my love, my trust, my savings, now looked so small, so ordinary, not a monster, not a myth, just a man. One of the officers asked gently, "Ma'am, do you know him?" I opened my mouth to speak, but the words got stuck somewhere in my throat. What was I supposed to say? That he'd been my everything once? That I'd dreamed of growing old beside him? That I'd built an entire fantasy around his lies? I finally whispered. His name was Richard, at least to me. They covered his body with a sheet, and just like that, the man who had haunted every breath of my recent life was gone. Silenced not by justice, but by fate. Clara stood beside me, clutching my hand tightly. She didn't say a word. Neither of us did. We just watched as they took him away, both relieved and broken in ways words couldn't express. The following days passed in a fog. The newspapers ran headlines about "The Silver Fox Scammer Dies Fleeing Arrest." My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, police, victims, all wanting to talk. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was heavy, tired sorrow. There was no satisfaction in it, just an ache that sat deep in my bones. The police later told me they found fake IDs, passports, and over $300,000 in cash hidden on his boat. He'd been planning to leave the country. His real name, they said, was Jonathan Pierce, born in Michigan, wanted in multiple states for fraud and identity theft. Married once, long ago, to a woman who died mysteriously under suspicious circumstances. I felt a chill run through me when I heard that. Did he ever tell you about his wife? The detective asked. I nodded faintly. He said she died of cancer. The detective sighed. That's what he told all of them. But her death was never natural. The case was reopened years ago, but he disappeared before they could question him. A hollow laugh escaped me. Of course, even in death, he ran. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The real wife, the woman before all of us. Did she fall for his charm the same way I did? Did she see the danger too late? Was that how it started? One lie too many until he became the monster that found me decades later. I returned home eventually. My small house felt emptier than ever, but strangely peaceful. The fear that had haunted every corner was gone, replaced by something softer. I poured myself tea, sat in the same chair he used to occupy, and stared at the garden outside. The winter sun glowed weakly through the window. It struck me how easily life moves on without asking your permission. The world doesn't stop for heartbreak or betrayal or even death. It just keeps spinning, quietly indifferent. I tried to rebuild, little by little. Clara and I kept in touch every day. The widows' circle grew too. More women joined, sharing their stories, their healing. Together, we turned our pain into something useful. We organised awareness sessions at community centres, teaching elderly people how to recognise signs of financial and emotional manipulation. We made noise so that no one else would have to suffer in silence. Still, at night, I sometimes heard his voice. That calm, smooth tone whispering, "You trust me, don't you?" And every time, I'd wake up trembling, whispering back into the darkness, "Not anymore." Months passed, and the investigation slowly wound down. But then, one morning, I received a letter. No return address, just my name, written in familiar handwriting that made my heart stutter. Hands shaking, I opened it. Inside was a single folded page. The words were brief. "If you're reading this, Maggie, then I'm already gone. Don't let them tell you who I was. You knew me differently. Maybe that version was real. Maybe it wasn't. But the moments we shared, those were yours. Keep them if you must. Burn them if you can't." Ah. I stared at the page for a long time, my eyes burning with tears that refused to fall. Part of me wanted to rip it to pieces. Another part wanted to frame it. That night I sat by the fireplace, the same place where he once read to me, the same place where he promised forever, and fed the letter to the flames. The paper curled and blackened slowly, the ink dissolving into smoke. And as it burned, I whispered, "Goodbye." I thought that would be the end, but life has a strange way of leaving its doors half open. A few weeks later, Clara called me, her voice trembling with something between shock and disbelief. "Maggie, you need to see this." She sent me a link to an online article. A small, blurry photo showed a man standing on a pier somewhere in South America. The face was thinner, beard longer, but unmistakable. The caption read, "Unidentified American man spotted in coastal town after faking death." I froze. The world seemed to tilt. "No," I whispered, "it can't be." Clara was silent for a moment and said, "I don't know, Maggie, but if it is him, then maybe we were never supposed to win." That night, I didn't sleep. I kept staring at the photo until my eyes ached. It could have been him. Or maybe it was just a ghost my heart refused to let go of. I'll never know. But somewhere deep inside, I felt that old familiar chill. The one that comes when you realize some stories never end neatly. Some men don't die in the water. They float between lives, wearing new names, finding new hearts to break. Still, I whispered to the dark, "Wherever you are, I forgive you. Not for you, but for me." The wind outside howled softly against the window pane, almost like laughter, or maybe like a farewell. It's strange how silence can become your closest companion. After everything, after the police, the headlines, the sleepless nights, I found myself craving quiet. Not the lonely kind that used to hurt, but the kind that feels like peace after a long storm. I began to move slower again, to notice things I'd forgotten existed. The sound of the kettle's first whistle, the soft groan of the old floorboard near the hallway, the way sunlight rested on the garden fence at noon, turning the paint into gold. Life had returned in small fragments, and I learned to gather them gently. I sold my car, closed the joint account that once bore his name. I even repainted the kitchen, replacing the pale yellow he loved with a deep ocean blue. New beginnings, Clara had said, handing me the brush. She'd moved in down the street by then, so we saw each other often. Our friendship was something forged in fire, the kind that can't be broken. Together we laughed about things again, even about him sometimes, though the laughter always had a tremor underneath, like glass that remembered being cracked. Months went by, and the world kept turning. People forgot the story, the news moved on. But for us, it lingered like an echo. Every now and then, I'd meet women who'd been fooled by men like him, lonely hearts who believed in forever, and I'd hold their hands, look into their eyes and tell them, love isn't supposed to take everything from you. If it does, it isn't love. One evening, the sky was painted in soft purple streaks, the kind that only appear before rain. I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea and the scent of old roses drifting in. The television murmured in the background, some reporter talking about economic fraud and new scams. I half-listened until I heard the words that made my hand freeze mid-air. Interpol investigating suspected international fraudster Jonathan Pierce, believed to be alive in Brazil. My cup clattered to the floor, spilling tea across the rug. The voice continued, calm and detached, describing a man with salt and pepper hair and blue-grey eyes, who had eluded capture for years. My pulse raced. My heart didn't know whether to break again or to laugh. He was alive. The room seemed to blur around me as I turned off the TV. For a moment I felt dizzy, then suddenly, calm. I wasn't surprised, not really. Some people are like smoke. They slip through every crack life gives them. I realized then that maybe his survival was inevitable. He had always been one step ahead, charming the truth out of the world and twisting it until it bent to his will. But not mine anymore. Clara came over as soon as I told her. She looked at me carefully, waiting for me to collapse. But instead, I smiled faintly. He's still running, I said. Let him. I'm done chasing ghosts. We sat together for a long while, the kind of quiet that doesn't need words. Outside, thunder rolled far away, but it didn't scare me anymore. I'd already survived the loudest storm of my life. In the weeks that followed, I focused on the widow's circle. We turned it into something larger, a foundation even. We called it the Second Bloom Project. It offered workshops for elderly women on digital safety, emotional boundaries, even art therapy. I started hosting storytelling evenings too. Women from all walks of life would gather in the community hall, sit in a circle, and share their truths. The good, the ugly, the beautiful. Some cried, some laughed, but all left lighter. It was at one of those evenings, maybe 6 months later, that something unexpected happened. After everyone left, I found a small envelope on my chair. My name was written across it in a hand I didn't recognize. Inside was a photo, an old one, faded and slightly torn at the edges. It was a picture of me and Richard. No, Jonathan, sitting by my garden bench. His arm around me, both of us smiling. On the back, a single sentence. Thank you for reminding me I could be human, even if just for a while. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. My breath caught in my throat. My fingers trembled as I held that image, trying to understand what it meant. Was he reaching out to mock me again? Or was it remorse? I'll never know. But for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt something closer to closure, maybe even pity. Because while he could run to the farthest corners of the earth, changing names, stealing hearts, wearing masks, he'd always be trapped in the same lie. And me? I was finally free. That night, I walked out into my garden barefoot, the grass cool beneath my feet, the sky clear and endless above me. The air smelled of earth and rain. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark. You don't get to live inside me anymore. A breeze swept through the trees, soft and warm. For a moment, I imagined it carrying my words far away, across oceans, across borders, maybe even to wherever he was hiding. The next morning, I framed that photograph and placed it on my mantel, not as a reminder of what he'd done, but of who I'd become. Every scar had its story, and this one was mine. Sometimes I still wake up early, make tea, and sit by the window, watching the world slowly come alive. The sun rises the same way it always did, stubborn and forgiving. And in that golden light, I see the reflection of a woman I almost lost. The woman I was before the lies, before the heartbreak. She's older now, yes, but stronger, wiser, unbreakable. So when people ask me if I ever regret trusting him, I tell them the truth. No, I say softly, because he showed me that I could survive the worst kind of love and still choose to believe in goodness. Love didn't destroy me. It taught me the cost of giving everything to the wrong person and the power of reclaiming myself afterward. Now, when I pass by the mirror, I see more than wrinkles and old memories. I see the quiet strength of a woman who lived, lost, and still learned to love again, this time her own company. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the evening air turns still and the garden lights flicker, I swear I can hear his voice again. Not whispering promises or lies, just a faint echo carried by the wind saying, "You were the only one who ever saw me." I smile then, not with sadness, but with peace, because maybe that's true. Maybe I did see him, for a moment, before the darkness swallowed him whole. But I also see myself now, clearly, completely. And for the first time in my long, complicated life, that's enough.